Welcome to Interview from Mexico. I'm Laura Carlson, and I'll be your host as we look at cutting-edge issues with the men and women who know them best, here on Telesur. Mexico City is one of the largest and most diverse cities in the world, and that gives rise to all kinds of artistic expressions. Urban art in public places and for popular consumption is a growing phenomenon, and it flourishes here in Mexico. What are the major themes of modern Mexican culture that are expressed on the walls of our cities? And who are the leading figures in this new artistic movement? We're here in the skate park in Mexico City with the leading proponent of urban art, El Wachavato. Thanks so much for being here with us today on Interview from Mexico. I think the first question is one that our viewers will have on their mind. How did you get the name El Wachavato?
Okay,
Wachavato is a compound word that comes from wacha, to watch, to observe, and vato is like, the translation would be like, boy, you know? Like to say to your friend, hey, take a look at this, no? To say to your companion or to yourself, that the graphic says to you, hey, take a look at this man, or take a look at this kid, or vato, I don't know, there are a lot of ways to say it. But it's a word that it's made up of Spanglish, from where I come from in Sinaloa. It's true that for being very close to the border, we have this relationship of a really pocho use of words, right? Very much from the south of the United States. So for me it seemed really easy to baptize my project as Wachavato, as something very representative of the zone, and at the same time, something that invites you to look at the graphic in the street. Let's say, in this way it's very local, that has a lot to do with my work, and I mean, in this way, it wasn't very complicated to baptize it, to put a name on it.
From the mixture of cultures and taking culture to where it can be seen by everyone. Well, tell us a little bit about how you began to do urban art and art in the streets.
For me, the relationship with urban art was to discover a place. To discover a place where my art could be seen. I studied art from the time I was 6 years old. I came from a family of 10 people.
Oh?
And I am the youngest. So, for me it was inevitable, or it's impossible, to be anything else. My brothers and sisters, I grew up among musicians, painters, dancers, photographers, all of them. So for me, and the fact of being youngest meant everything that was related had to do with art, with graphics, with sounds. But I had this interest from a very young age, of visiting museums, galleries, and I had this sense that I didn't like the idea that people went to the galleries for the first day, for the inauguration, and then they didn't go back, and afterward, the space became lonely. So I had, like I say, this thing that I didn't like, that the people didn't go back, and that the graphic became something stored, solitary in closed spaces. I think for me this was the most important reason to go out and put myself in the streets. Not so much as a movement, which now had become kind of too big. Suddenly, it was inevitable to get involved and become part of a scene, of a movement of street art. But for me it was a more intimate, more romantic relationship, right? I'm really corny, you will see.
And as the youngest of 10, you had to find some way to stand out, right?
Yes, of course. But I was telling you, I don't know why I became interested in graphic art. I don't know why I went to do that. I think that I had the most influence very close to me, which was my sister Maria. And since then, from a very young age, I drew and did things. But I think that's it, to always have some contact with the people. Even now, I'm a very accessible guy. Like, someone who always tries to have a very close contact with people. And I think my graphic art is like that too.
Yeah, it's very accessible to people and has become very well known throughout the world and of course here in Mexico. Well, when you first began, you did a series on Jesus Malverde. Can you tell us why you chose this figure and what it means to you?
Well, I have a relationship that's very close, very tight. A very intimate relationship with Malverde. When I was little, my mother went to the altar. At this time, the chapel didn't exist. She would go to ask favors, to cross herself, to pray.
And this is in Culiacán, Sinaloa.
This is in Culiacán, Sinaloa, yes. I was born in Culiacán, Sinaloa, so I had this relationship from very young. But through my mother, this is very respectful for me. These are things that I respect and take care of a lot. Now I come right out and share it, and I talk about it like now with you. So for me, Jesus Malverde was this icon who took care of me from a boy, and even now I see him as a grandfather, as someone from the family. I don't see him as this untouchable saint where you go to confess, but rather it comes to be a part of this family and someone who during all these years had taken care of me. So I always thought, who else could be my protector and take care of me and my work as Wachavato if not Malverde, right? Furthermore, he's an icon of Culiacán. The fact that I express myself with a figure like Malverde in the streets rapidly identifies me with the northwestern part of Mexico. Quickly, people who saw it knew that the guy who did it belonged to a culture of the north, someone who came from Culiacán, Sinaloa.
But that also got you related to narcocultura, because the figure of Jesus Malverde is known as the patron saint of the drug lords and the patron saint of the poor, with these two connotations. So has that been a contradiction for you?
I don't like the word affected, because it's a very strong word, it seems to me. But well, in this sense, if we talk about that something, you can say that it was a double-edged sword. It could have been something that helped my graphic art to grow, like it was something that the people were drawn to for the question of Jesus Malverde, in a morbid way, you know? Like, what is this? Who put this in the streets? Who paces it? Who does it? I could have been this, and on the other hand, it could have been like, you say something that affects you, like this relationship very close to drug trafficking. And now that you ask me that, I do like it because it's an issue that I can clarify. It's something I say. I never wanted to be an apologist or wanted to say that the drug trafficking was something that was okay. Simply, it was my context. I was born in this environment. I was born in Culiacán, in Sinaloa, and what I saw around me had to do with this issue, no? So it wasn't really, or I never set out to talk about drug trafficking. It was something that I experienced from childhood. So then my relationship with Jesus Malverde I see as something completely healthy, you know? Something totally family-oriented and loving. If you want to call it that, I'm a guy who's drawn to a lot of things like this. I'm a happy guy.
Well, it's so important to make this distinction between the narcocultura, which is usually associated with an apology, even a celebration of the culture of the drug cartels, and the way that you're using some of these images that comes up naturally from your own experience. And speaking of your own experience, I've read that one of the other experiences that had much to do with your taking up the figure of Malverde in your art was an accident that and the way that Jesus Malverde contributed, in a sense, to your recovery. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yes, it was in 2007. I was with a friend, Rafael. We were in his car here in Mexico City, and well, someone crossed the street without watching, very strong. I don't want to make it really dramatic, so I'm softening it a little. But well, it was a terrible accident. We had a terrible accident where Rafa, who was a good friend, died. In my case, I had to enter into this whole round of hospitals and homes for recuperation, so I was in total around 5 months without being able to move, with my ribs broken and my legs broken. And in this moment of being stuck in bed thinking, you become a very analytical person, you know? Thinking about your family, you take care of everyone, you give new value to things. And in this moment I thought, I need to live, I need to walk again. And I thought a lot about Malverde, I thought about him, and I had never asked such a big favor, right? It was always take care of my brothers and sisters and my mother. But this time it was, I need to walk again, I need to be alive. So what I did was offer him a manda. The people, when they go to the chapel, they leave money because it still is this activity of offering money to help support the poor. the chapel still has this function with the people of Culiacan. So what I did, instead of going to give money in the chapel, was to print up bills, because they also use the theme of dollars a lot. So what I did was print up $1 bills, so it would be a larger quantity, because then a lot of people asked me, you should have printed up bills of 100, but this wasn't the idea, no? It wasn't to show myself as some really wealthy guy. It was like someone who saves up $1 at a time and hands them out all over. For me, the way to paste up dollars for the Malverde was to give thanks. The bills themselves say on them, "Infinite thanks Malverde," at the top. It was to pay this manda, this promise that I made him to be able to walk again, and my idea was to give thanks. Everywhere I went, I got to Melbourne, Australia, I was in Barcelona, later I went to Argentina and Colombia, and in all these places, I pasted up pieces with Jesus Malverde.
Do you think it was a miracle?
They say that Malverde doesn't do miracles, he does favors. So he did me the favor of putting me back on my feet again. So for me, this question of Amanda was Amanda I complied with. So this relationship is a relationship of family. To grab someone by the hand and to say to them, I need to be alive. Help me walk. But entering the subject of the graphic art in which I could express myself in the streets, and at the same time relate to the promise that I made him and to keep that promise. And you can say that we both ended up satisfied.
Well, he's one of the few figures that continues to recur in your work since you made a more formal or personal break with a lot of the images that had come to be associated with narcocultura. Now that you've made that change, in what direction are you taking your art today?
Well, I have grown in a lot of ways, no? I did an exercise beginning about 3 years ago to know to detach myself, an exercise to rebuild myself. I felt suddenly that me as a person, I had dedicated half my life to Wachavato. That is, I stopped being me as a person and I gave everything, all my potential, all my time to Wachavato. A project that grew for this reason, because I gave myself to it 100%, but I forgot myself as a person. I forgot my family, my brothers and sisters, my partner at this time, so it sounds really cool, but also it affects you, it tires you, it's exhausting, things lose meaning.
Well, is there a contradiction between an art and having, a certain amount of fame that's very public, and a personal life? Is that one of the things you felt like you were coming up against?
Yes, I think I could have been Wachavato all my life, and it would have seemed like everything was fine. But now I'm a guy who, as I was saying, has grown in this respect. I grew, and in the end I didn't like it that much, because I forgot things that were important for me. And in the end they were things that for me were the ones that must nurture me and allow me to continue to create. So suddenly, at the same time, these things were fading. And now that I'm over 40, I've become a person who's very self-critical. I'm not a guy who criticizes everything that is outside, but rather I say, why not? I have to begin with myself. I'm going to start with a guy who I know, right? Who I have here close, not outside somewhere. It sounds funny, but I said I'm not going to criticize the graphic art from here or there, or who paints well, or who is the best and who is the worst. I'm going to look at myself. And from this point of view, I reread everything that I was working on as Wachavato, and I began with a clean state. So I started a project that is called New Time, and I got rid of everything that was around my workshop, my house, and I started to travel all over. It was like a way to rebuild myself. So all my projects now are in line with this. They are in the line of traveling, seeing new things, meeting new people, to learn from zero again. I have exhausted all that this figure had given me in a certain way, because also you manage to see things, really falls all of a sudden, This is what happened to me. I'm just talking about me. So now all the projects I do have a lot to do with themes of growth.
Let's return to that point. We'll be right back after a short pause. We're back in the skate park here in Mexico City, and I was just talking to El Wachavato about the changes in his art. Sometimes when you're as well known as you are throughout the world, you can get cubbyholed, and it's difficult to have the public understand or accept a new face. How is the public receiving your new forms of artistic expression?
I don't know. Sometimes I think they like the old Wachavato. They like, well, they liked exactly that thing that I told you a while ago that I completely closed. This part of the narco culture. Of the guy who comes from Sinaloa and tells his story. It was even a little morbid sometimes. Sometimes I think they really like that in particular. And I say that because there have been galleries and museums that have invited me to exhibit, and they say, "But we want this series. We want to invite you, but we want you to bring these pieces." And then at times it's hard. But in the end, I don't know, I'm a guy who takes the bull by the horns, who always plays by his own rules. And I just say, I'm not that guy anymore, I'm in a period of reconstruction. And also, it's that I take risks. Maybe a gallery will close its doors to me, but I can't. I can no longer return to being that vato that I'm not anymore. I'm a guy who works a lot with sensations, with the things I like, with the things that give me goosebumps. So if I arrive and put up an exhibit that I did almost 20 years ago, I won't be happy. I'll no longer be this artist who is reinventing himself all the time, who is rebuilding himself. So I can refuse or decide to say that I don't want to be a part of that exhibit. So I don't know, I think this is the response simply to close doors. Something that hasn't happened. They have respected this new part, this new stage of mine, of self-criticism, of growth, of evolution as I call it.
Well, I wanted to talk about that new stage because it's explicitly, many of the pieces start out with, "This is not street art." So what's going on there? A self-negation, a protest? How did you reach that reflection?
I say I have 20 years working as Wachavato, half of my life, that's a lot. And I've seen the evolution of street art, the spread, I've seen change. So there are things that I don't like, and things that have been labeled as street art. I've seen a lot of things in the street, and people who jumped on the bandwagon called street art, and they say,
well, like what? I mean, what would be the aspects that you'd criticize of the street art movement today?
both things. Things I don't like and things that for that reason I can criticize. That is to say, I love this stage when street art was born, when I got involved to be a part of a movement where we would go out in the morning or hidden or in the wee hours of the morning to make spaces of our own. To go out and claim spaces, to print stencils, to put up posters and stickers. It was a little against. We had to watch out for the police, for the guards.
So this aspect of civil disobedience was central to the origins of the movement.
Yes, a lot of people came out and called it vandalism. I never liked this word. I always saw it as an artistic movement, but very free. This whole part that I was telling you about, of doing things illegally, was like a really important part of the roots of the movement as street art. So then this little by little began to end. I'm talking about the street art, not about graffiti or taggers or bombers. This is another movement, okay? We also have to know how to separate. The people who do graffiti are not the ones like us who do street art.
How do you make that distinction?
Graffiti is the whole movement of people who must use aerosols mainly and can cover whole walls completely, doing doubles, doing murals, no? Really big things. And street art, no. Street art is characterized by mostly three principal elements that are the use of stencils, no? To do repetitions with a template, to put up posters, or the guerrilla with stickers. These are the three principal things of street art. Now, there has been this evolution that I was talking about that I'm not so enthusiastic about, which is to paint these huge murals, nice ones. Very pretty, that's the word, no? Where you can go to have a cup of coffee, and also in certain places, the Roma, the Condesa, like in the places very, like just made for this type of expression. These huge pretty murals, and in the corner they have a sponsor. There is the sponsorship of a brand that allowed and sponsored the creation of this mural.
So do you feel like it lost a little of its original social message?
Of course, this is what I'm talking about exactly in this series. And instead of becoming a critic from the outside, because up to now I haven't mentioned to you any names, this is what I see and I think about what I see and what I experience in this change. You're going to see a guy on top of a crane painting with all these cans of aerosol, really expensive, with a sponsor. This disillusioned me. I don't do this, I don't belong to this. But I don't do it not because they haven't offered it to me or anything, but rather because it doesn't even stir my passions. I don't want to be there and be photographed while I do it. No, I think in this way it lost all its attraction as a rebel artist, as a movement of rebellion, something that marked itself as against something or simply had a discourse that it shared. Something that marked itself as against something or simply had a discourse that it shared. It could have been love or politics or humor, but it was something that showed up in the morning from one day to the next, and for people, in addition to liking the message, caused them this curiosity of who did this, where did it come from? This is the art, this is the expression that, as I was saying, gave me goosebumps. Now I think much of this has ended. I don't say it 100% because there are still a lot of people who do it, but I think a lot of it has lost its attraction.
So how'd you come up with the slogan, "This is not street art"?
Because after seeing all this and including myself in the movement, what I did is, because I'm a guy who is not so critical, I tend to learn more toward building instead of criticizing to build, no? This I'm really clear about. So what I did was look at all that was happening around me, and instead of pointing out certain people, I started with me. I started by looking at things that I was doing that were no longer street art. It was something that I couldn't ignore. I was sticking off things, and I saw that a lot were ending up in galleries under sponsorships and all this. So I said, this is not street art, this is not the movement.
So it has the irony of being a comment on your own work, criticizing your own work, but that also goes beyond that.
Yes, there is a very Mexican saying that is, te lo digo Juan para que lo escuches Pedro. I'm telling Juan so Pedro hears me. So I started by telling this to myself, but it was also, hey, I'm saying this to myself, but also listen to this, no? That is, I was seeing this and how it had to do with the theme of irony. Believe me, I have done ironic pieces that were even both. A little while ago I did this piece that say, today is a good day to buy street art. And it seemed to me totally ironic, that is, that someone would go into a gallery to buy a piece because they had the idea of buying a piece of art. So to see this piece and see that it was on exhibit in a gallery and that the people bid and paid money for it seemed to be funny, you know? Well, it's good money. All the series that I've done now begin with this phrase of, this is not. I can tell you about three. The first, that was the father of all of them, says, this is not street art. And I did an exhibit last year and the beginning of this year, and what I did was try to construct the whole gallery as if it were the street. But it made no sense because of the fact of being totally in a private place, in a closed place, in a place where there was permission and a budget to create a gallery of street art, no? So for me it seemed, let's say, that I didn't go into the issue of disillusionment, but really this is not a street art.
So it's like when a double negative becomes a positive.
At the end of the exhibit, there was a large mural that said, this is not a good graffiti. But because it was perfectly done, with all the time in the world, with a really expensive paint, to put it like that, with all the care in the world, this isn't a graffiti that you find in the streets, no? With this illegal manner, little time to do it, and this was perfectly done, and in that respect, it loses all meaning.
Well, we wish you the best of luck on your travels and with your career, and thanks so much for being with us. We'll be back next week on Interview from Mexico.